Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters from quiltingismytherapy.com, and welcome to the third video in the Hello Spring video series, where we're quilting our way into spring with some delightful spring-themed designs, and then using those panels to create some pretty cool projects. In this video, we're gonna be quilting the mini Hello Spring panel I designed especially for this series. I'm gonna show you how to quilt the Flower Meander, as well as how to create some pretty cool variations, and then I'm gonna show you how to switch it up to create your own flower designs. So whether you're a brand new machine quilter looking to learn the ropes of FMQ, or an established machine quilter looking for some design inspiration, this video is for you. And even though we're on the third video of this 4-part series, it's not too long to quilt along with me. To find out more about the videos or to check out the panels and other products shown in the video, all you have to do is click the link in the description box below. Well, now that we got that out of the way, let's get to it. Nothing says spring quite like beautiful spring flowers. I'm gonna start by showing you a Flower Meander. I love it because it adds texture and a gorgeous look to your quilting, and it's a lot of fun to quilt. So I've got my mini pillow panel made into a quilt sandwich, I've got my free motion foot on, and I'm ready to start quilting. So this Flower Meander starts with a little swirl, just like a little curl to act as the center of our flower. And every flower needs some beautiful petals, and that's what we're gonna add next. I'm gonna start by quilting some arcs that work their way around the swirl until I run out of room. But we want a big, beautiful flower, so I'm gonna keep doing this, adding more rows of petals. So from this point, I'm gonna swing out and continue quilting those arcs, working my way around that swirl. As I'm quilting that next row of petals, one thing that I'm not trying to do is I'm not trying to make them match up to the previous row. Instead, I'm trying to keep them all somewhat the same size. It's almost like I'm disregarding the previous row altogether and just focusing on what I'm quilting right here. And then just like we saw with the previous row, once I run out of room, I'm simply gonna go on to my next row of arcs. And I can actually add as many rows as I want. It's not the size of the flower that's going to determine the density of the quilting, it's the size of those petals. So if I want the quilting to not be very dense, I'm going to quilt those arcs so they're about a ½ inch or so. Or if I really love the person I'm quilting this for and I really want to quilt it densely, I can shrink that down to about a ¼ inch. But whatever size you decide to use, just try to keep it as consistent as possible throughout your flowers. Now once I'm ready to branch off and add my next flower, I'm going to quilt a partial row, stopping in the area where I want to add my next one. I'm simply going to quilt another swirl that's going to act as the center of my next flower, and then go right back into quilting those petals. And whenever I'm ready, and I decide it's time to branch off to do another flower, I'm going to repeat those steps. Now, as I'm filling in this area with my flowers, I'm trying to keep that whole area filled in as much as possible. So if I find myself stuck with a little area that's not quite big enough for a flower, I'm just gonna add some more arcs. Or if I need to work my way around an area, I can just add more petals, quilting around what I previously quilted. Now I'm quilting with this darker pink thread so you can really see what I'm doing on camera. But if I were actually quilting this on a quilt, I would use a thread color that blends in a little bit more. That's going to give me the beautiful texture of that flower design without showing off every bump and bobble. I just love that curvy, kind of pointy look, and has that beautiful flowery texture without being over the top. And just like we've already seen, if I need to maneuver my way around the area, I can just quilt arcs that help me get to that point. And since each flower kind of blends into the next, if one doesn't look perfect, it's going to be fine because all you're going to see is that overall texture. Now I love this design, not only because it's gorgeous, but because it's also easy to quilt once you get the hang of it. It's nice and repetitive, so once you kind of get into that petal quilting zone, you can just quilt your heart out. The trickiest thing with this design though is making sure that everything is filled in as much as possible. I'm quilting my flowers, so it's kind of like a blob. It's kind of growing in this way. I don't want to have big gaps in between them that I have to come back and fill in later. It's not the end of the world if that happens, but it just makes it a little bit easier to do it this way. But just remember, if you get stuck with weird gaps in between your flowers, just add more petals and fill it in. Now, one thing that commonly trips up some quilters is we'll make that first swirl too big. I want to keep that swirl on the smaller side and use the petals to build up that flower. What I don't want to do is quilt a really long, kind of strung out swirl. And let me show you why. So here I have my swirl. It's a little bit more elongated, it's not round and small. And as I start quilting my petals and working my way back to that starting point, we're gonna see that I have some gaps in that quilting. Now there's nothing wrong with this, but what's gonna happen is I'm gonna be left with some unquilted area right in here. If that happens, I'm just gonna keep adding more arcs, filling that in, and moving on. So if you're trying out this design, just keep on quilting. I promise, once it's all filled in, it's gonna look great. I also love this design because you can create some different variations using the same basic idea. For instance, let's say you're struggling with those arc shapes. Sometimes it can be a little tricky coming in and out of that point. Instead, I can take those arcs out completely and replace them with a wavy line. It's gonna start the same way with a swirl, except this time, instead of quilting my arcs around that swirl, I'm just gonna quilt a wavy line. And just like we did with the flower, when I run out of room, I'm gonna swing out and add my next row. I love it because it has an organic kind of look, it's kind of fun and funky, and I think it looks beautiful. I really like this kind of design for busier fabrics where you can't see the quilting anyway, maybe novelty quilts or children's quilts, just because it adds a nice, beautiful look to it. Just focus on trying to keep that line nice and random and remembering that we don't have to make it match up with the previous line. As long as the whole area is filled in as completely as possible, it's gonna look great. And since it's quilted the same way as the flower, they blend beautifully into each other. So I can easily go from one design into the next, kind of giving my quilting a secondary pattern. Now, another way you can switch up this design is to use a little bit of echoing to really make the individual rows of the flower stand out. Now, I will tell you, it takes a little bit longer to do, but it looks great on your quilts. So it's gonna start off the same way with my swirl and my first line of petals. Except this time, before I go into my next row, I'm gonna echo the row I've just quilted. Instead of those rows kind of blending into each other, this echoing is gonna help separate each row from the next and let us see the beautiful unquilted area in between. Then once I'm done echoing, I'm gonna swing out and do my next row of arcs and echo my way back. Now when I'm quilting this design, I like to make my petals a little bit larger, more like a 1/2 inch, and then keep my echoing a little bit closer so I have a little bit of difference in between the two sizes. If the spacing between these were similar, instead of looking like echoing, it would just look like another row of arcs, which isn't the end of the world, but if I'm taking the time to echo it, I really want it to stand out. And as I'm quilting these flowers and filling in that area, I'm not worrying about whether or not I'm ending all of them on the same echo or all of them on the arcs. That doesn't matter. Instead, I'm just getting it as close as I can and moving on. I just love how you can take one shape and change it up to create several different designs. Like I said, it takes a little bit longer, but it looks so beautiful. Now so far, we've been quilting that flower so it kind of meanders in all different directions and fills in that area. But we can also take that design and quilt it on a much bigger scale in a single flower. For instance, on my panel, I have this partial flower right here, and I think it'd be the perfect place to quilt my flower. So starting in the center, I'm gonna quilt that little swirl and then start building off of it, quilting those arcs. But instead of moving back and forth in between the rows, I'm gonna keep going round and round until it's a size that I like. But remember, with this design, I'm trying to keep all those arcs a similar size. I'm not trying to make them match up with the previous row or even trying to touch that previous row at all. Instead, I'm trying to keep that spacing as consistent as possible. Once I start to run into the edge of the quilt or a different shape over here, I'm just gonna bounce back and forth quilting those arcs. If you're newer to machine quilting and you're kind of struggling with going in all different directions, this might be the design for you. I love how it just gives it that beautiful flower look, and even though those arcs aren't perfectly lined up on the petals of the panel, it still looks gorgeous. And you can take this idea of quilting one big flower and make it as big as you'd like. I could start in the center here and keep building it out and have one beautiful giant flower. Now for my flower meander, I like that more simple shape of just quilting those arcs around that center swirl. But life would be boring if there was only one kind of flower, so you can definitely change up the shape of it to create a different design. If you've ever doodled little flowers, this is something you're gonna love. Instead of quilting that design so it fills in the whole area, we're gonna break them up and change up the shape of them. So I'm gonna start by quilting my line that kind of meanders in all different directions. Then, once I get to a point where I wanna add a flower, I'm gonna quilt my circle and then build off of it, quilting my petals. And those petals can be any shape you want. In this one, I've quilted them so they're a little bit more pointy because I like how that looks. And then I can keep building up that flower until I'm happy with the size of it. Here, instead of adding another row of petals, I just added some echo lines around it. Once I'm happy with how that flower looks, I'm gonna quilt on out the other side and continue quilting that meandering line. Now I'm using that line to help me move my way through an area and get me to a spot where I have enough room to quilt my flower. And once I'm ready, I add my next flower by quilting a circle and quilting those petals around it. This time I quilted my petals so they looked kind of like loops. Then I'm going to use that meandering line to fill in any areas in between my flowers and then branch off to my next one. Not only will this give you more of a bouquet of flowers instead of the same flower over and over again, it's going to give you a less densely quilted design. It's perfect if you don't want a ton of quilting or you just want to finish your project a little faster. And as you're quilting, try experimenting with different flower shapes. If you don't like the way one looks, just don't quilt it again. If you're using a thread color that blends in with the fabric, you can see all those beautiful pops of flowers without the quilting being so in your face. And depending on how you're feeling, you might have more wiggle lines and less flowers, or you might go all out with the flowers and have tons of those. Either way, it's gonna look amazing. I mean, really, how fun and whimsical is this? This is definitely a quilting design that will make you feel like spring all year long. Now, if the thought of going in all different directions is tripping you up, you can combine your flowers with wavy lines. Basically working your way from one side of the area to the next, throwing in a flower every once in a while to break it up. I'm basically doing the same thing as I did with the previous design, except instead of quilting that line so it goes in all different directions, I'm quilting it in one single direction. And once I reach the edge of my area, I'm going to travel along it about an inch or so and then repeat working my way back to the other side. Another way you can switch up your flower shape is instead of quilting that circle in the center, you can quilt all your petals so they come back to that same spot. Not only does it give your flowers a slightly different look, but it might make it easier to transition from one side of the flower to the next. And like we saw with the other design, depending on how you're feeling, you might have a lot of flowers in there, you might just have a few. Either way, it's going to look unique and beautiful. So now that I have a lot of different flower design variations to play with, I'm going to finish quilting in this mini panel and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all done. And this mini panel is finished. I think it shows that quilting can be fun and whimsical and still look amazing on your quilts. So whether you go with that regular flower meander or switch it up by adding some wavy lines or echoes, the result is going to be one stunning looking quilt. And even though there's a lot of different designs going on this panel, I think it looks amazing. I just love how you can switch up quilting designs and make them work for you and your preferences. Now, let's check out this other mini panel that I quilted previously. I use that same basic idea of quilting that flower meander in the background, except in that large flower in the center, I quilted one big kind of flower. Starting in that middle and then building out from there, and then using leaves to fill in around it. Using the fabric as inspiration for the quilting designs makes it so much easier to decide how to quilt your quilts. Now it's your turn. If you're quilting along with me on that mini Hello Spring panel, go ahead and get it quilted. Whether you use the designs we've learned in this video, your own designs, or heck, even some walking foot quilting, it's gonna be fine. Because in the next video, we're gonna turn this quilted masterpiece into some beautiful projects, including fabric buckets and a supply roll-up. Nice, easy projects that are so much fun to make. Well, I'll be back soon with that video. In the meantime, everybody, happy quilting.